Good afternoon. This is Eric Levinson, Head of Business Development at VinaCapital, and welcome to day 4 of our investor conference. Over the past week, we've covered the macro environment of Vietnam. We've had a conversation with Tra Le, the head of a Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange. We featured VOF, our London-listed closed-end fund, and today our focus will be on our alternative investment platform. So I'm joined today to start with Hieu, who's the head of our real estate investment group. We'll then move on to focus on our green energy platform. We'll talk about venture capital. And then finally, we'll cover financials. Now, I understand that financials aren't, quote, alternatives, but it's such a large weight in the VNI that we wanted to give financials and banks specifically their own conversation. So with that, let's get the alternative conversation started. Hieu, now, you've invested over the last decade hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate in Vietnam across sectors. So it's great to have you here to give your perspective. Obviously, with COVID, the market had unprecedented challenges. I know the audience, which is primarily overseas investors, there are some local investors, and as we all know, real estate is oftentimes people's first investment inside of Vietnam. So let's start by giving kind of an outlook or maybe an overview of the current state of the real estate market in Vietnam.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. So good to be back here after 1 year. And like you said, 2021 was like a very unprecedented year, not for the real estate, but the entire economy as a whole. So let me give you a quick snapshot of what happens with the market over the last 12 months. There are 4 primary sectors in real estate, and the 2 sectors that suffered the most during COVID outbreak was commercial assets and hospitality sectors. And commercial assets, you see empty malls, it's been locked down because of the sanction from the government. Hospitality, there's no international arrivals. Domestic was restrained, and they have to run in zero occupancies over the past few months. Industrial asset was exploding since 2019, and there's a wave of strong FDI influx into Vietnam since then, proven Vietnam to be the destinations for the next manufacturing base of multinationals. However, it's been slowed down too because of the limited in terms of labor supply and as well as the disruptions in terms of the value chain. However, I think after this, when we recover back to normal, industrial will quickly bounce back. Residential is probably the spark of the market that we can see still maintain a very good value sustenance as well as good liquidity, especially in the landed property market. It's also helped by very limited supply because, again, the problem we talked about last year about licensing has not been fully resolved yet. So that's the overall of the market over the last 12 months. Not much update. Hopefully there will be a better year coming.
Interesting. So, and I really appreciate the overview. Now, if we had to change the word Vietnam and we could put any other market, you would think that commercial hospitality, the 2 areas that you said were impaired, is really impaired kind of everywhere. But having said that, what will likely be different in Vietnam will be the response, will be kind of what happens next. So can you give us what you think that way forward is? I see your slide says the New Hope, so I appreciate the Star Wars reference. So what is the, quote, New Hope?
I think after these difficult times, it's a common expectation that people will expect a quick bounce back. I'm not that optimistic that the bounce back will happen in weeks' time. However, I think there are many initiatives that the government is trying to implement in order to boost back the economy. First and foremost, and very important, is the recovery of the state disbursements into infrastructures, into state investments. I think it will boost a lot. It will give a strong push for the market to moving forward. Second of all, I think there is a new administration coming to Vietnam early this year, and the market has been expecting a very breakthrough in the policies, especially the new land law coming to effective this year or next year. Hopefully will create a breakthrough in terms of licensing for the projects. Of course, the vaccinations has been accelerated over the last few months, and we can see that Vietnam will achieve 70% or even more vaccinations for the people in the workforce toward the end of this year. So people coming back to the workplace, people coming to the shopping malls, the office will be filled up, and hopefully our hotels and resorts are welcoming our guests too. Last but not least, I think technology, because of the COVID-19, is also advanced, big leaps over the last 12 months, and create great disruptions, not across sectors, and real estate is not an exception for that. We see a lot of innovative solutions in terms of sales and marketing, property management. People are more relying on digital solutions for what they do right now, and drive down the cost base and create more margins for the real estate sector. So I think that's something exciting to look forward to in the next coming years too.
In fact, in a little bit later, we'll actually have Trung, our head of venture capital, and so we can discuss with him the prop tech sector. He's made a few investments. I do want to ask you a question on this slide. You talk about kind of the core cities, which I'm going to assume are Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. And then you talk about the satellite cities. Can you expand a bit on that? And if there's, do they represent a better investment going forward?
Absolutely. I think we have talking about this topic last year, and we have proven the point very strong. Like I said, the government are heavily expanding the infrastructure developments to reduce the pressures of infrastructures, population and pollution from the major cities like Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. And you can see a strong emerging of the economy of surrounding cities, of the big cities. Ho Chi Minh is classified as a triangle of economics, including Ho Chi Minh, Bình Dương, and Dong Nai, and now expanding to other surrounding cities like Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu now becomes a very strong logistics hubs, Tây Ninh and the Mekong Delta as well. In Hanoi and the north, the trend's even more visible. You can see across the northern coast, Quang Ninh, Haiphong emerging one of the fastest growing in terms of GDP across the provinces. Samsung invested in Bắc Ninh, Thái Nguyên, and bring up the whole economy. There's an influx of labor forces from other provinces, even in the south, into the cities. And so there are about 6 or 7 provinces surrounding Hanoi now attract more GDP and FDI than Hanoi itself. So it's a very visible trend, which causing also that real estate investment into these provinces now becomes fantastic investments.
Because you have more need for residential housing, not just the industrial park. And I think it also speaks to the whole urbanization trend, which we've discussed. It's not necessarily urbanization to Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi, it's urbanization to kind of newer cities that were becoming smaller cities, which are becoming larger cities.
Yep.
Okay, so that's fantastic, and thanks for the overview. Now, understanding that's what the outlook is and what the roadmap looks like, how are you and VinaCapital thinking about then building a business or responding to this?
We spent a lot of time during the COVID-19 to rethinking, rebrainstorming about what we could do over the next period of time, leveraging our strength and the track record in Vietnam. And one of which we comes into a very exciting project of leveraging the over decade of investment in Vietnam. So we are rebooting VinaLiving brand, which is our real estate development arm since 2009. We've done a series of successful projects with this brand, and now we're restructuring and refocusing the brands on the landed property sectors, which we think that is a good niche market for us to play in, and where we have the customer base and reputations that will bring the best product in the class to the market itself. So the portfolio of VinaLiving is also being secure with over 200 hectares of landed land bank, and we are offering very attractive products to the markets starting from this year. One of which, for example, I'll give you one example. We are developing a very luxurious waterfront compound in Dong Nai called Aqua City River Mansion. It's a joint development project with Tier 1 developer in Vietnam, Novaland, as part of the larger township that they're building in eastern Ho Chi Minh, only about 30 minutes away from Ho Chi Minh City. The launching starting from July, despite the COVID-19, was very successful. 50% of product has been sold over the last 3 months. The second project we're also launching is another compound in the middle coastal area of Vietnam called the Ocean Villa Nguyen. Ocean Villa is the first beach villa brand in Vietnam. We started in Da Nang about 10 years ago, was very successful. And now this is the second project we built on a very beautiful beach of Nguyen. And we have been receiving booking since last 2 months. Out of the 290 villas, the batch one, half of it has been 70% sold. So we see that the market is actually responding pretty well. And after the lockdown is released, I think the tractions are building up very strong.
Interesting. I mean, I've obviously seen your work, and I know it's fantastic. And so the standard of these, forgive me for being the salesperson here, it's actually really high quality, and the design is beautiful. So the question I'll ask on behalf of the audience, and we'll get to the audience Q&A at the end. Okay, this sounds terrific. How can people invest with you? Is it a fund? Is it a project basis? Is it direct? Is there an opportunity? Someone may buy a villa, but what if they just want to participate in the upside of the project?
Yep. So I think for individual investors, of course, this is a marketing pitch. You can always buy a product from us. But the bigger picture why we are putting our portfolio into VinaLiving is aiming to create a listed company in the next 2 or 3 years. It's a very robust plan that we already put up the roadmap very clearly. And the restructuring actually completed by this quarter, and from next quarter, we are starting to do the pre-IPO fundraising. So there are multiple ways for the investors to participate in this journey that we are very excited about. Like I said last year, if you are a first-time investor in Vietnam, the best way to invest is to participate in kind of hybrid structures in a way that we will guarantee you a minimum downside or minimum return, which is very much more attractive than a debt product, but you can also participate in the upsides when you go into the IPO. Or we are also looking for strategic partners to accompany with us to bring it to the next level. We are raising funds from strategic partners to be a co-developer with our project in the future as well. So all of those information or materials, I hope that is coming up to the market in the next quarter, and you can all be part of it.
All right, well, terrific. So Hieu, thank you so much. We're going to have you back in about a half an hour to do live Q&A, so you can actually type your questions into the chat function. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Great, Eric. I'll see you all later.
Now we are joined by Nguyen, our head of energy investments. Khoa, please join us up here.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. So we just heard from Hieu from real estate, and one of our really important initiatives here at VinaCapital is our renewable energy platform. Now, if you've been reading much about Vietnam, what you've seen is the explosive growth in GDP is really fueling a demand for energy. Now, at the same time, a lot of research has been done, certainly globally, and within Vietnam, that climate change is impacting Vietnam in a really meaningful way. And so as Vietnam looks to continue its growth and source its growth, a focus on renewable energy and developing renewable energy has taken center stage. With that, VinaCapital is going to be one of the leaders in this initiative. So Khoa, we actually spoke, well, we speak all the time, but we spoke a year ago about what your plans were. Walk us through kind of what does the energy marketplace look like in Vietnam today, and then we'll talk more about kind of your platform.
Thank you, Eric. So 2021 has been a fantastic year for Vietnam renewable market and energy market in general, specifically for VinaCapital renewable platform and energy platform specifically. So 2020 to 2021, we have seen significant growth in renewable capacity. In 2019 to 2020, we have seen growth in the rooftop solar business, where it grew by 8-fold to 9 gigawatt. From 2020 to 2021, we have seen growth in the onshore wind and nearshore wind sector. By the end of this year, we expect the total capacity to reach circa about 18 gigawatt of renewable capacity. For LNG capacity, is also subject to the discussion on the National Energy Master Plan, but we expect the LNG capacity will increase significantly by the end of 2030. Currently, as per our discussion with the various governmental agency, we expect the LNG capacity to go up to circa about 25 gigawatt by 2035.
Okay. Now, for those of us, and obviously this presentation is geared more for the energy and infrastructure players, but for those of us that are not in that world, just give me an idea. If you say our baseline energy is this, in 2030, how much more do we need to develop?
Sure. For the renewable sector, as of today, we have roughly about, let's say by the end of 2021, we would have roughly about 17 to 18 gigawatt. And by the end of 2030, we expect this to double to at least about 34 gigawatt by the end of 2030, meaning that there would be significant opportunities for investor, especially private sector, to participate in the renewable sector. For LNG sector, as of today, we have 0 megawatt capacity connected to the grid. Therefore, this would also be a significant opportunities for investor.
So actually, earlier in day one, Brooke Taylor, our CEO, COO, he mentioned that we had, and I say we, I mean you, were really part of the team that led the first ever, is it coal to LNG transition in Long An. So maybe spend a minute on what that means for Vietnam and a bit for our platform.
2019 was the year that we started the energy platform, and Lng Power Plant is also one of our first projects. So since started in 2019, we have made tremendous progress, especially in 2021. So early this year, around March this year, we secured the investments registration certificate for the projects. Despite COVID situation, we're still progressing tremendously well with the feasibility study and various other studies required for the projects. By operations in 2026, 2027, we expect our project would provide circa about 5% of the national energy consumption. That would be 2026, 2027.
So getting back to more the renewable on the cleaner side, so when people think renewables, the focus is generally on solar and wind. As you and I have gotten to know each other, I'm now learning about onshore wind versus offshore wind. So Vietnam with a very, very long coastline and a lot of wind, I suppose. You know, when people think about developing a platform, is there a preference maybe for VinaCapital when we're thinking about developments, when you look at the pipeline, is there a preference for wind or solar? And if so, why?
Sure. I think for renewable sector, the investment profile for the subsector are very different. For example, solar, as of today, we already have circa about 16 gigawatt added to the grid. Therefore, for project under development, or so we call greenfield projects, for solar subsectors is fairly limited, especially in the next 10 years. Therefore, for solar farms and opportunities, the focus would be more on the brownfield asset, i.e. more on M&A, more on roll-up strategy and consolidation strategy. Now for onshore wind, as of today, we would have circa, I would guess, about 1 gigawatt capacity added to the grid thus far. By the end of this year, potentially marginal increase, probably about 1.5 gigawatt. But the target for onshore wind is circa about 17 gigawatt by the end of 2030. So this is also the area where significant focus on, especially on the project under development, because most capacity be added to the grid between now and 2030 currently is already on the master plan, but not yet developed.
Interesting. So that's certainly going to be a focus. So one of the things that we've talked about, and we did some calls earlier last week, and these questions came up, which is the feed-in tariff and I guess the expiration at the end of October. And so just to be candid, today is October 20th. We're pre-recording this because next week Khoa will be in London. And so this will expire at the end of October. Maybe between now and next week we'll know more. So apologies for not doing this on the 27th or in November. But does the fact that the feed-in tariff is expiring, does that give investors a pause? And has it given them a pause for 3 or 4 or 6 months or longer? And what does that mean for you as you think about development?
Thanks, Eric. I think the pause over the last 6 months primarily driven by the COVID situations, where the expert couldn't really enter Vietnam due to travel restriction. Now, a lot of turbine orders already been made, but it really could not be transported to Vietnam border. So that has postponed the progress on many of the onshore wind projects. Now, over the next, let's say, 5 to 6 months, I guess, I think there would be some uncertainties on the remuneration mechanism for onshore wind, offshore wind, and solar projects, as MOIT, or Ministry of Investment and Trade, is currently looking at the options, either to extend the feed-in tariff or moving to the auction mechanism.
So are those the only two options? So you talked about just extending the current plan or moving to an auction mechanism. I won't ask you if you have a feeling of one or the other, because there's no upside to that one. But is there, I'm assuming, I know that auction mechanisms are not common in Vietnam, but they seem to be very, very common outside of Vietnam. You know, are both good for different reasons?
Yes. So on the feed-in tariff, what is good about it, it gives the investor the sense of visibility on the returns, of course, even prior to the project developments.
Yeah.
Now, for the auction mechanism, of course, it increased the competitiveness of the market, and hence, I believe, this is my view, that it would give the foreign investor an edge versus the local investor. Number one, because even though the auction mechanism is something new for Vietnam energy market, but it's definitely not new for seasoned energy investor from outside Vietnam, notably Europe, US, or even around Asia. Because auction mechanism has been, has been adopted by many countries over the past 5 years. Now, in addition to that, the foreign investor has an edge on the financing, especially on the cost of financing. However, I would say that for auction mechanism, there are a few things that the foreign investor has to be also extra careful about, especially on the framework, the licensing and permitting, the land ownership and land acquisitions strategy. Therefore, I think, yes, auction mechanism would be an opportunity for foreign investor, but at the same time, I believe, with the right partnership, with the right local partner, would greatly enhance the opportunities, the chance for foreign investors to optimize returns and to secure the projects and develop projects locally in Vietnam.
Okay. So, well, that's very exciting, and I guess we'll all have our eyes peeled for, I guess, November 1st or maybe before, if the government announces the plan. So, as I said, you've done, really, you and your team have done amazing work. Can you talk a bit about what you've accomplished in your platform in the last 12 months?
Sure. I think first thing first is our Lng Power Plants. As mentioned previously, we have made tremendous progress on our Long 3,000 megawatt power plant with $3 billion US dollar investment capital. Now, in addition to that, we also, in collaboration with some strategic partners from US and Europe, to develop circa about 2 gigawatt renewable platform at the moment. Total ticket size, we expect around 1.5 to 2 gigawatt, $2 billion US dollar. We expect to accomplish about 2 gigawatt capacity of renewables by the end of 2025. And that's why we actively participate in the market. As of today, one good thing about it is we have relatively very strong pipeline. Therefore, our goal now is to be proactive, go to the market and acquire the asset. This is our target.
So in a sense, we've signed deals, we know exactly what our structure looks like, and we've been the only people here because nobody else has been able to come in, and so we've been able to kind of work the pipeline a little bit more. So again, being local has its advantages.
That's right. And also, with our network that been established thanks to our private equity business and our real estate business, that also a significant leverage that VinaCapital has. That helps you build up the pipeline very fast and also with good quality. Right. Because at the end of the day, the quality of the assets we have to rely on the quality of the sponsor behind it, right? Yeah.
So, we talked about earlier listed equities and private equity, and we're talking about energy. One of the things I said earlier on our day 2 was getting the beta is what most people focus on, renewable, but it's still active management. You have to buy the right project. Mm-hmm. It's not even the right wind or offshore, onshore solar. It's getting the exact right project, not just wind. Yes. You want to get the right one. So let me close with one last question, because a lot of people are saying, hey, this is really interesting. If they want to invest with you, how can they? Are you looking for strategic investors? Are you looking for financial investors? Is it for an existing product or structure, or is this for something that you'll be developing longer term?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think when we talk about energy, usually we need to think about an investment horizon of at least 5 years. And I think the right tenor is around 8 years, 8 to 10 years, because that's when your portfolio could become mature enough that justify for the right exit timing in terms of valuation as well. I think at the moment, with our strategic partners already participating in the platform, we are also looking for financial partners at the moment. I think the goal here is to increase the scale of the platform. It allows us to capture opportunities in the near term. I think we have the capacity, we have the pipeline, but the thing is, with the right capital, I think then we can capture better opportunities and bigger opportunities.
So how much capital, additional capital, are you looking for today?
I think as of today, in terms of equity, we're looking for at least about $200 million more. But
More the financial investor as opposed
Financial
to
investor,
strategic
yeah.
investor. Okay.
So I think, but the more the better, I guess.
All right. Well, Khoa, thank you so much. As I said, a week from now he will be in London, and so at the end of this session, we'll grab you, Ismael, Hieu, and Trung for Q&A. So if we didn't cover anything in this session, we're going to have audience Q&A at the end. So thank you very much for joining us. Safe travels, and we'll be back with you in a minute.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, well, that's terrific. So we've heard a lot about our plans with renewable energy, and now we're going to focus on venture capital. So I'm going to invite Trung Hoang, who is our head of VinaCapital Ventures, to join me here. So Trung, please come onto the stage.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
All right, so let's get right to it.
Sure.
So Trung, you really are one of the pioneers in venture capital investing in Vietnam. So you started really investing with DFJ in 2006. Over the last 15 years, what's changed with venture capital in Vietnam?
Thank you, Eric. I think that we were lucky to be on the ground in 2006. And our observation is that the venture capital landscape has been developed with the Vietnam economy. It's keep drawing some fund into Vietnam, and it was peaked in 2019. It went down a little bit earlier this year due to the pandemic, but still ranking number 3 in the region. As of now, Vietnam is having 3 unicorns. And it's interesting to see that it took Vietnam more than 12 years for the very first one. And then it's shortened to 8 for the second one. And at the moment, it's only 2 years for the new unicorn. That translates into the more mature investment ecosystem of the venture capital, ranging from the funding from university economy, from university ecosystem for human capital, to all of the corporate, government, and community support.
Interesting. So the other thing I think for those of us, and you and I have done calls with clients and prospects in Asia, in Europe, and even in the US, so a lot of people are seeing more players come in. There's startups, of venture capital startups, and so we're seeing regional players, additional local players, and even a couple of global players. Does this change the opportunity set? Does it change how you and your team invest?
Well, I think that's just to highlight why Vietnam is hot. That's why more people is coming in. And that's my answer to that is that Rome is not built overnight. So we were lucky to be on the ground for the past 17 years. We've learned ourselves, we burn our hands, and then our investment had been successfully over a year. That's pretty much saying that we are differentiate to other investors by our strong local team, by our deep understanding of the local market, our exposure to the international practice. And for the past 17 years, we was the only one have been able to return money back to our investor. We divested our first fund in 2018 at 3.8 times of multiple with a variety of variable assets via trade sales, via M&A, and also even IPO locally.
So, it's interesting, and I know we're friends, so I know how humble you are, so I'm going to ask you a couple of leading questions. So, investors will look to you and they'll ask about track record, but one of the most important things is the advice we can give to investee companies. So is our track record of investing in Vietnam and being a successful venture capital investor, does that make it, I don't know if it's easier for you to invest because of the ecosystem that VinaCapital has?
To answer that, yeah, partially yes, because VinaCapital does build an ecosystem. Overall, VinaCapital Group invests in more than 200 top-tier companies in the market. But since we are in the high-risk industry, And our investment is very much on the team. And we focus on Series A to Series B, where we more on the product market fit. So we try to select the company which can grow fast in the scaling mode. Lots of the founder with the operational skill set, the potential of the product and the platform which can generate more revenue and can develop in the future in order to serve the larger market of 100 million population. So the advice, we're not trying to be very micromanagement, but we're more in terms of strategic thinking, making connection, give them the best practice, so we can plan for the longer scale of the company and also for the future exit.
So when you're thinking about the key criteria to make the investment, is management team most important, or is it a sector call?
Since we come into the market at the growth stage, so that they're a combination of both. The sector is very important because it shows that the market can, there's room in the market to grow. We cannot invest in the market, even though we're the best product and the market is so small and then you stuck there. But management team is also very important because in Vietnam, lots of the company, they use technology to disrupt their own sector where they work in. And most of the time, they want to make it more efficient or increase the user experience. So operational skill set to really implement it, really to sell it, so customers will pay for it. And from the value they derive from is very important.
Okay, so you mentioned technology. Now, interestingly, and Vietnam is unique in this, there really, from a public company perspective, aren't many technology companies that are market leaders. You have FPT, which is really the market leader. Now, having said that, within the venture capital community, is tech a big opportunity, and is that a big part of your portfolio?
Yes, it's very much. Vietnam is top of in top 5 countries which will generate more values into the economy in the next 10 years. There's a forecast that Vietnam will contribute up to 100 billion USD in the new economy in the next 10 to 15 years. The income per capita is keep increasing. So when you look into the economy, there's all of the company, either they use the technology or there's a touch of technology in order to transform the business, in order to enhance the user experience, in order to connect it to create the bigger ecosystem. So to use the technology in order to disrupt the business they are in is very much we look into for the technology-driven, for the light assets company, which they can scale fast and use less resources.
So Trung, based on your answer, so is it less about these are technology-specific companies, but it's really that technology is enabling these companies to be disruptive forces in their industry?
Yes, it's very much for Vietnam. There's a lot of companies that are using the technology across all the sector to make it more efficient, to increase its sales, and to connect more customer. So the technology's application in order to transform the business is more important.
Interesting. So in his opening comments, Brooke mentioned what's going on in real estate. We had Hieu, who was just here right before, talking about prop tech. So I know your fund V2 has exposure to Rever and Homebase. So could you just maybe expand on what those technologies that they're using to be disruptive inside of real estate?
Oh, very much. If you look into the Vietnam market nowadays, the journey for individual to own a home is very long and very difficult, from the inventory assessment, from the properties selection, into the financial support and property management. So Rever and Homebase help people in all of the journey. Rever help the AI technology, which will help to build the proprietary the database, so users can access and know exactly the property which they want to look after or what they want to buy. Also from Homebase, the financial support is very important for the millennial and also for the younger people in Vietnam. And most of the time, they cannot touch credit from the traditional bank. So home base help you to increase the lifetime value of the asset by appreciation algorithm, or also will help you to find a better source of capital for you to start your dream of owning a house.
So it's interesting when we talk to people, they're asking, oftentimes asking us, hey, I want to invest in AI, or I want to invest in this, and it's not a cloud computer company, it's not AI, it's a real estate company that's using AI as part of their value add.
That will be the combination of many things, and the most important thing to us is the inside knowledge of the industry and how the entrepreneur can put them all together for the solution. It can be a platform, it can be the marketplace, but that's the total solution in order to serve the mass market of Vietnam.
You know what? I think to give kind of more flesh to this theme of disruption, there have been two purchases that were announced really in the last month with disruptive technologies. One in kind of what I call new retail, one in insurtech. Can you mention those two purchases and what made them unique?
No, thank you very much. Our team did work really hard, even though in the difficult time we were home, but we were able to invite two chair ladies into our portfolio company. One is from InsurTech, that is Global Care. The other one is Duty Cash, which is a cross-border transaction. The difference of the solution they provide is that Global Care is very much in the center of the junction between fintech, between edutech, and between health tech. So when you buy insurance, all of your journey, they not only make it easier, but it also helps you to utilize all of the facility, all of the services along the journey by assessing the abundance of access points, by streamlining the claiming process, or by also understanding better the service they're providing. For Duty Cash, cross-border transaction in Vietnam is increasing. E-commerce is one of the major economy contributor into the GDP. But there's a lot of hurdle, like local languages, like the cross-border duty and tax, like the local payment problem. Duty Cash gives you the platform that you can sit here and order anything from Africa or US, deliver at your front door with a very transparent and upfront cost.
So the way you explain that to me is now I can order from Amazon in Vietnamese dong, pay with a Vietnamese credit card, and get it delivered here and know exactly what it costs, including getting through customs.
Very much. Everything at your fingertips.
Which is a huge value add. Okay, so now I hope the audience is now saying, hey, this sounds fantastic, and I know from our discussions you have a robust pipeline of new ideas as well. So if someone says, I want to invest with you today, they want to get exposure to venture capital in Vietnam, how would they do so? What does our platform within venture capital look like today?
Well, thank you very much, and we're always welcome. The current VinaCapital Ventures is an evergreen investment platform. And we are continue to invest, and we hope to add 6 to 7 new investment in the next 5 to 6 months. At the moment, we are looking for the investment, anything from 500K up to 10 million. The flexibility gives us the access to the opportunity first before we decide where the capital to allocate. So anything we can do is either from our pocket, or we also can do it via the syndication or joint venture. And after 6 to 7 months, we see that there's a need of more capital from the current set of the portfolio, and also for a company have been through this current difficult situation, they will need a larger check size, and we are ready to roll out to launch for the new initiatives in more traditional GPLB structure to support them.
Well, thank you, Trung. I know that your time is up, but we're going to bring you back in about 20 minutes, and we'll have Q&A from the audience. So thank you so much for the introduction to venture capital.
Thank you very much, Eric.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. And now we are joined by Ismael Pili, our head of research. And we're going a little bit out of order. This is being pre-recorded because when we do this live next week, Ismael will be traveling to visit clients in Europe. He will be available for our live Q&A, but this one we're pre-recording. So when you see him in a different suit with a different backdrop, he'll be in Europe. But so day 4, again, is alternatives. We've already heard from renewable energy, we've heard from real estate, we've heard from venture capital. Since banks are 28% of the V&I, we wanted to make sure that we allocated some specific time just to cover banks, to give you our perspective and also answer any questions you might have. Ismael is one of the most qualified people in the region, been in Asia and really covering financials and banks in Asia for 25 years?
Yep.
Okay, so we're very fortunate to have him here at VinaCapital. So we'll just start with the first question. What's the general health of the banks in Vietnam today?
Most people will look at the NPL ratio as the indicator of health of any banking sector around the world. In that regard, the Vietnamese banking sector is standing at about 1.8%. Of course, COVID is here, just like everywhere else, and there's going to be a lot of pressure as far as asset quality is concerned. And the SBV itself is thinking this is going to hit 2.1% by the end of this year. That's not the whole story, however, because the SBV, which is a state bank of Vietnam, has applied some forbearance measures. They have asked the banks to maybe extend some concessionary rates, and they've even lowered interest rates to existing loans. That is trying to dampen the pressure that the banks are facing. The short story behind all this is we are not unique in terms of this environment where COVID is exerting pressure. But if I had to apply some numbers here, that 1.8% number or the 2.1% that we're looking at the end of this year may expand as high as near to 8%. So 8% in terms of distressed loans suggests that it's a little bit scary, but the health of the banking sector, they're okay. And part of the reason behind that is the reserve cover that the banks have is running around 120%.
So it's interesting. So as you were saying that, I was thinking, you know, am I waiting to talk or am I listening? And I was hopefully doing both. But one of the questions I would have now is there a threshold that gets you uncomfortable? So you said you're comfortable with 8%. Is there a number that you say, you know, that's a bit too high?
Right. There is no magic number. I mean, truth be known, we've seen NPL numbers go up to double-digit rates, and this was during the Asian financial crisis. After the GFC, things weren't that bad, but nowadays the banks are stronger. And part of the reason behind that is the Basel Committee has introduced tougher measures. Mind you, here in Vietnam, we're still under Basel II, but that does not mean that the banks are not trying to build up their capital base, make themselves stronger. And in that regard, they built up their provisions year after year to the point that they're well over 100% in terms of that reserve cover that I mentioned. And I think they also have some collateral backing that up, by which the real estate is about 68 or 70% by some estimation. And that's probably sufficient to provide some buffer.
Interesting. So when we talk about NPLs, that's, you know, kind of the first thing that you were looking at. Are there any other specific risks that either keep you up at night or that you're always looking at when evaluating banks?
Right. The typical answer behind this is people will always ask about the real estate sector. Here in Vietnam, 7% of that goes to developers, 13% of that goes to mortgages, 20% essentially. That is actually not my biggest worry, however. My biggest concern is actually with SME. As we walk up and down the streets here, we see a lot of stores that have been shuttered. And even though we have some reopening at the moment, we're not quite sure whether they will reopen. If you take a look at the loans that we have at the moment, the SBV itself has said that about 25% of loans have seen rate cuts, and another 50% of new loans have been given concessionary rates. So in essence, they're trying to prop up the businesses to make sure that the banks don't feel that pain, because in the overall scheme of things, the banks are still going to be the big conduit of growth, both economically and for corporate growth.
Interesting. So when you think about it, you know, it's funny, we've talked about being fairly bullish on banks. What I heard there, and, you know, kind of be fair and balanced, you started with risks. I asked you about more risks. Are you actually optimistic about kind of banks trading the remainder of 21 and more importantly for 2022, keeping in mind that they've already had a pretty good run this year?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you take a look at the banking sector, it's one of the best performing year to date. Mind you, the way that roadmap has transpired is that the first half, in other words, first quarter, second quarter, banks did fantastically well. But the third quarter, they faced some headwinds, partly because of concerns of lockdowns affecting the asset quality. The fourth quarter, because of reopening, I'm very bullish on the banking sector. This is similar to what we've seen elsewhere around the world, that when there's a reopening or recovery play, banks tend to lead that charge, and this is going to be no exception. 2022 will still be the banks as far as I'm concerned, because there's still a lot of runway in terms of the bank's attractiveness. You look at the penetration rate in terms of retail, it's still quite low. Only a third of the populace have banking accounts, and the margins are still quite fat. We're talking about 4% as of the first half this year. Mind you, that will probably come down because of all those rate cuts and concession rates I just mentioned, but it's still going to be quite fat relative to what we see elsewhere in the region.
Interesting. So one of the things we've also talked about, which has been, I think, surprising to people that maybe don't follow Vietnam specifically, is the valuation. So you have banks that are up 50, 60% or more the first 6 months of the year. What are the valuations like today on an absolute basis? And then how does that compare to the region?
Sure. So at the moment, we should be focusing FY22. Right? It's so close to Christmas, there's no point to look at this year. In that regard, we're still looking at about 9 to 10 times PE, which is very cheap as far as we're concerned. If you look at it in terms of price to book, it's 2 times against ROE of about 21%. If you compare that around the region, if you're getting that type of ROE, you could command as high as 3% or 3 times price to book usually. And so you can argue that there's still a lot of value left for the banking sector in Vietnam.
And how are they trading? So that's versus the region. How are they trading kind of, if you think about against themselves historically?
Yeah, historically, they're still well below their mean. As I mentioned, they're probably 9 to 10 times PE. They're probably trading historically around 12 to 13 times. So there's still value to be had.
And that's what's interesting. So we've talked about the market beyond financials, and what we see is that people look and they go, oh, it's at 1350, it's at 1400. The last time it was here, it was basically hot money. Now it's being driven by earnings growth. So it's a very different market. We've also seen, as we talked to Trial A earlier last week, that there's been broad retail participation in the market, which has also increased the market participation. Now that maybe isn't bank specifically, but there's a follow-on effect. Do you look at the increase in retail participation in the market as healthy for banks? Is that, are they related?
There is some relation, of course. The banks, as you say, is the biggest sector in this market, and sometimes just ease of access will probably draw in the retail investor. Most of the big caps are with the banking sector, and so in essence, whether you're playing the big caps versus small and mid caps, or whether you're looking for financials because of their higher beta, which would probably do well in this rebound in terms of the recovery or reopening play, the banks will attract that lion's share of attention.
Interesting. And then the last, I have 2 questions, but the last one kind of is there anything unique? So when you're looking at banks in Vietnam, Vietnam has a lot of unique attributes. Is there anything that looking at banks that's different here? Because I know you've covered banks in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Japan, in the Philippines, I mean, all over Asia. Right. So when you're looking at banks in Vietnam, is there anything where you're saying it's different here?
The margins. I mean, there's been margin pressure around the world, not just in Asia. But gosh, these guys, as I mentioned, were hitting 4% net interest margin the first half of this year. That may not be sustainable, but at the same time, even if yields are coming off because of a low rate environment, they still have some leeway to change the loan mix to go after the higher yielding retail. And at the same time, the other thing that's unique is the CASA, or the current account, savings account, it's only 23%. That is very low by the Asian regional standards. When you're looking at anywhere, the next lowest would probably be in the 30 percentile rate. So in essence, there's still funding costs upside, and at the same time, in terms of loan mix, that's another one that could probably enhance the margins. And as with every bank around the world, margins is one of the key drivers to the profitability, and so that 20% type might be sustained for a couple of years.
So Ismael, this is definitely the last question. So, as we think about the banking sector, 28%, you said you're very bullish on banks, which should lead the market higher, being 28%. Is this something where you buy the beta, where we like all banks, and you just say, let me just pick and I'll buy the basket? Or at VinaCapital, do we have a perspective that there's some banks we like more than others, or do we like everything equally?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of banks here, and certainly our preference is with the private banks. We do find them that that they're growing much faster, whether it's in terms of credit growth. As of the first half 2021, the system credit growth is 18, yet the private banks are growing 23, and the state-owned commercial banks are 15. The margins are bigger also with the private banks, and that of course then leads to higher profitability. So when all is said and done, I do think that there's a lot more commercial imperative with private banks, and that's where our preference lies.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you very much. I guess, Ismael, I will see you in about a week, so safe travels to Europe. And now we're going to transition to our Q&A with Hieu and with Trung. Well, great, and now we are going to begin our live Q&A. And so what you can see here is I'm joined by Hieu Do, Head of Real Estate Investments, and Trung from Venture Capital. And we are joined by Ismael, Pili, Head of Research, and Khoa, Nguyen, Head of Energy Investments there in London. And so we're going to do kind of a back and forth. And so I've got my little iPad here. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat function. And Ismael, looks like you just finished. So the first question will actually go to you. We discussed earlier possible themes for the market. Are there specific themes in the banking sector that are also worth talking about?
Yeah, there's at least half a dozen themes, if not more, that we can run with the banking sector. But the most prominent one that I kind of see at the moment is really first the focus on consumer retail, mortgages, autos, credit cards. FDI and infrastructure will be another one that we would be running with. And then maybe a third one would be the turnaround themes or turnaround plays that we see with select banks out there. The other ones that I just want to briefly mention would be anything with regards to the capital increase, because the banking sector is still working under Basel II, and yet they still lag behind the regional average as far as capitalization is concerned. And another one perhaps would be consolidation. There are so many banks still in Vietnam, anywhere from 35 to 40, not including foreign banks. And that's what I'm seeing around the world, around the region. Consolidation will eventually have to happen. And one thing I have to mention, and not miss, is of course digitization. It's an ongoing buzzword. It's hard to differentiate them, but it is something that may have been accelerated because of the COVID situation around the world as well. But it's something that a lot of the banks will continue to harp on. I would probably close by saying that there is one theme that a lot of the analysts seem to try to highlight, and that's the fee income business. And I will continue to downplay this because I think it's still too early for Vietnam to be running with this idea, simply because there's so much upside or so much runway with regards to the basic banking services of loans, margins. Those are the bread and butter of what banks have to do, and there's still a lot of opportunities for that in this country.
Well, thank you. And no surprise, our next question is on real estate. Actually, here we are on day 4, but there were actually questions on day 1 and day 2 on real estate. And if you watched it, I said, hey, please come to day 4. So hopefully this is from whoever asked earlier in the week. Research has shown that there's a slower uptake in the residential sector here in Vietnam and even perhaps in other locations, even on landed property, which you specifically are bullish about. Does that raise a concern for you, or is that as a kind of professional investor versus someone that's just buying a house to live in? Does this represent opportunity?
Yeah, Eric, I think there's technical answers behind that because most of the real estate transactions in Vietnam, you will have to go through the notary office to actually notarize the transactions. And during the last 4 or 5 months of lockdown, the notary office can't be working, and that's one of the functions that you cannot do online. Is you have to be physically in the office to conduct the transaction. So that's one of the main reasons why the transaction has been slowed down significantly because of such technical problem. The second explanation for that is basically it's happened around the globe. Something weird really happened. People expect the price of the properties will go down over the pandemic, but globally, even in the US, Europe, is going up. Whereas the confidence of the investor, there are sections between them lose confidence and becomes a very complicated psychology issue in buyers whether to decide or not, because it's on one side is probably going up, on one side is whether I can make future profit or not. So the slowdown is also because of the mental psychology of the buyer as well. But however, I believe that normally real estate transaction is very much concentrated in Q4, and now we have opened the lockdown. Let's see the figures in Q4 and see whether it's bounced back or not. I'm positive about that.
Excellent. I'm going to stay with you because a question just came in, and we were going to do everything we could not to touch directly on the China Evergrande crisis, but Sally just asked a question which is related, so I think it's a great question. On real estate, how much real estate in Vietnam do we think is held by Chinese nationals via whatever methods? And what fallout do you think may come from the slowing of the Chinese property market?
Well, I think the property market in Vietnam is still very much restricted to foreigners. According to the law, the foreigners are only allowed to purchase apartments, not landed property, and there's certain quota.
Yeah.
And we have researched last year or 2019 that yes, Chinese accounted for large proportions of those purchase of the apartments, aside with Korean and Japanese also. But I don't think they play a main theme in the market. The local players are still predominantly the drivers behind the supply and demand in the market.
Yeah, so you haven't seen that same type of speculative buy and flip because the foreigners can't really do that?
No. It's really difficult for them to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, actually, we're going to move now towards Khoa on the energy side. So, we talked about how we did this a week ago, pre-recording, because you had yet to travel. I understand that we haven't had any news on the quote feed-in tariffs, but I'm wondering, as the market moves to an auction mechanism, does that change the platform strategy? And I guess if so, does that change maybe where investment flows? Meaning we talked about solar, we talked about wind, based on the regulatory environment changing or the incentives maybe changing. Do you still think that solar and wind will be where people want to invest in 3 to 5 years, or does it go towards something else?
Thanks, Eric. So the good migration of the market toward direct PPA and auction mechanism, I think is a global trend. It just follows what already happened in many developed countries in US, Europe, and recently some countries around South Asia. So this is not something specific to Vietnam. But I think from our perspective, I think this is a golden opportunities for many foreign investors, because now the focus shifting toward being the most competitive bidders to get connected to the grid, i.e. from the foreign investor perspective, then you can leverage on the competitive financing angle with potentially cheaper cost of funding, then leverage on the technical expertise, potentially tap on the global economy of scale to get the cost down overall. And henceforth, I think from our perspective, this is a very good chance for foreign investors to be more proactive in the market, and likewise for VinaCapital. But again, our focus has been always on to have the right type of partnership, because alongside with all these competitiveness, this also comes with certain challenges, like again, coming up to the challenges around the permitting, the licensing, the land acquisitions, and all the guidance around certain investment law or acquisition strategy, pipeline access. I think that's why VinaCapital is focusing on having the right type of partnership. Toward the direct PPA, again, similar to auction mechanism, is a global trend. They're going to make the market more competitive. I think specifically for direct PPA, it would allow both off-takers and sellers, i.e. the renewable purchase sponsor, to both be more proactive and creative in structuring the power purchase agreement, and henceforth potentially giving access to better cost of funding, better financing structuring, and actively mitigating the risk from both buyer and seller perspective. So in general, the migration to a more competitive market, it would not change our strategy. But in fact, it is excite us because it opened more doors, more opportunities for us to participate in this game.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and it's always nice to hear that. I guess it provides more clarity longer term as well for investors outside the country. Ismael, we're going to come back to you. Could you explain more why margins at banks inside of Vietnam are higher than margins in other countries?
Sure. So margins, the way I look at it, is actually largely determined by the whole banking sector itself. Another factor that determines the margins would be perhaps what interbank market rate might be. But in both cases, for Vietnam's case, the banks have a lot of pricing power because, from my perspective, there's not a lot of penetration yet. Only a third of the population have banking accounts. And so in some sense, there's a scarcity in terms of credit availability to the consumer side. A mortgage rate, for example, in Vietnam is around 10 to 11%, which is quite high. And yet at the same time, you look at the interbank market, it doesn't serve as a pricing mechanism. What's probably more valid as a pricing mechanism as far as asset liability management is concerned for the banks is actually the time deposit rates. And even in itself, the time deposit rates are roughly around 5.5% to 6%. And that's already down from about 7%. But the banks, of course, try to maintain the spread wherever that might be. And despite the fact that there are asset yield pressure at the moment because of concessionary rates and rate cuts because of the COVID situation, the funding costs have fallen much faster, which is why we've seen that expansion in margins from 3.6% in 2020 to about 4% in the first half, simply not from the yield side, but from the funding costs coming off. So the short answer behind this is the banks simply have that much pricing power.
Interesting. And it's interesting because also, while you said only a third of people in the country have a bank account, there's actually quite a large number of banks here to the extent that there will likely be consolidation. So it's not like there's a shortage of banks, it's just that people, for whatever reason, have chosen not to kind of enter the system. So actually, a couple of questions came into you on venture capital. So these are two, and they're kind of related, which is, we've done a lot of calls, and people, I think, intellectually are always interested in venture capital. People want to invest in what's new technologies. So the questions are, for someone that wants to get into or invest in venture capital in Vietnam, how do they get started? What would your advice be for people that have maybe done VC in other markets, and is it different here? And then has your strategy changed at all because of the pandemic? And whether that is because different companies are raising money or you've actually thought differently about how you want to invest?
All right. In terms of advice, if we speak from the VinaCapital group, I suggest that there are reference points that people will read the book from Andy Hieu, Crossing the Street. He had put together all of his experience doing the capital market, private equity investment in Vietnam for the past 17 years. From outside, personally, I will highly recommend investors to really go down into the country and see the real thing with their own eyes, interacting directly with the founders and the community. That will really help them to make the investment decision and really see that Vietnam development is not only for Vietnam. For those investment folks who want to compare notes, we are VinaCapital Ventures, luckily be in the market since 2003. We have our lesson learned. We are always open to discuss and share to help to escalate the investment decision to make it very efficient.
And what about kind of post-pandemic? Any changes to your strategy, or maybe is the ecosystem changing at all as well?
We do see a lot of development and excitement in terms of new investment in area which people they don't want to try before, and now they have chance to try, especially fintech, edtech, medtech, and insurtech. And we are still very bullish on the country, going out to look for the country champion, especially in those now they can apply the more advanced technology in terms of AI, big data, blockchains. That Vietnam is ready to tackle for the largest solution. It's not only in Vietnam, but also in the region. And we're confident to disburse 15 to 20 million USD in the next 7 to 9 months into our pipeline.
And it's interesting because, you said fintech, edtech, health tech, insurance. I mean, one of the things we've talked about is it's not necessarily investing in technology companies, but it's investing in multiple sectors. But technology is what is creating the disruption. It's what's creating the efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I talk about the blockchain and AI and big data. You see, all of these things will really help to bring all of these sectors together and to solve, to resolve for the largest economic issues. It's not only in Vietnam, but also in the region.
Terrific. And Hugh, I have another question for you. And this sounds like, I'm not sure the answer in Vietnam, but so in a lot of markets kind of post-COVID, or even during COVID, I should say, you talked about real estate prices not going down. In fact, they went up. And what happened was in kind of the vacation home, the second home kind of exploded as people wanted to get out of the cities and, give their kids a yard. And, if the offices are closed, then why do you need to live in the city? Do you foresee, is anything happening in kind of the vacation home, second home market here? Is that a big industry here already? Is that developing?
Yeah, I think right in the middle of the pandemic in the U.S., we see news like CNN reported a surge in the price of vacation home in the U.S. and probably happens across the globe as well. So this is the cultural shift of the workforce too. They no longer have to be presented in the office anymore. So why are they paying tons of money for an inner city apartments where they can have a larger spaces with a better view and they just hold the laptop and still making the same amount of money? So I think it's a very logical shift of the market toward the sections. In Vietnam, there are a few more supporting factors as well. You can see the middle class of Vietnamese actually expanding very rapidly. And in Vietnam, the tax environment is still very friendly for inheritance tax. So people actually own a house because of their parents have a house. And it's very normal here that you live in a multi-generational kind of house. So it's easier for you to have a second property.
Because it's your first property.
Right. And the third trend is undoubtedly the properties in the CBD areas of the large cities becomes very expensive in a very fast manner. So you don't have many choices with that limited of income, but at the same time you want to enjoy, you want a different living environment. So the vacation home is actually a sector that makes sense a lot for the young people nowadays.
Interesting. And looking at, we talked earlier today about VinaLiving, and I think one of your developments, is that really focused on that area as well?
Yeah, so we see that that's a key demand of the market as well. And from the product launchings, we learn from our customers as well. Basically, people in the previous period, they're looking at properties in the vacation market is an investment. But nowadays, a lot of people think it's a reward. It's something that you can buy to enjoy life, and they focus more on the quality and the value we bring within, rather than how much money I should make every year. So it's quite a very positive, push for the market too.
Yeah. It is interesting. I was reading something earlier this week, just kind of post-COVID, where I think what's happening in society is becoming more about the experience economy, and quality with everything is becoming that much more important. So to the extent that whether that's a first home, a second home, a car, people are going to make sure that whatever purchase they make, quality is the deciding factor, and it's going to be less about just appreciation. People want to enjoy, particularly after being, in their own apartment for 3 or 4 months, no matter where you are in the world. Well, we've basically answered all the questions here. So I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for joining us. Thank you to Ismael and Khoa joining us, I guess, in the morning in London time. On behalf of VinaCapital, thank you very much for joining us today, and for hopefully joining us earlier. If you did miss any of our earlier kind of day 1, day 2, day 3, day 1 and day 2 are already on the website, VinaCapital.com. Day 3 will be on by tomorrow. And today, which is day 4, our final session, will be on by Monday afternoon. Again, on behalf of the firm, on behalf of the team, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your consideration. If you have any follow-up questions, please let us know. And we'll certainly be back with a webinar in January, kind of updating what happened in the fourth quarter and a 2022 outlook. Thank you very much, and enjoy the fourth quarter. Thank you.